And taking a look at what we can expect for the local market, joined by Evan Lucas from IG in Melbourne. Evan, welcome to the show on this Friday morning. Good to have you with us. Taking a look at the local market, I mentioned some of that mixed data coming from the US, but global markets still digesting that data coming from China. And we saw the iron ore spot price lifting. So where is the sort of focal point for you when this market gets underway?
I think from an Australian-centric point of view and looking at it from an Asian region, it's still coming out of that HSB flash figure. And what I took out of yesterday is that there is certainly a turnaround in certainly what they were seeing, and HSB themselves were slightly surprised to see output, new orders, new export orders actually reversing the trend. So we did see a 5-month high yesterday. They were just in contractionary territory, which is a very positive thing indeed. We had heard and had seen that we did start to see at the back end of April and basically the start of this month a real increase in terms of industrial production coming out as well. It hasn't come out in the figures, but that was certainly the word. So that they are seeing on an SME basis, which is also the part of the economy that is probably hardest hit by the Chinese fiscal regulation. So today, I still think we'll be watching that very closely. It certainly caused a 0.35%, 1 percentage point to jump up on the initial figure on the ASX, and then we followed all the way through. Found it quite interesting that the Dalian futures also, which is the iron ore spot price for September, moved forward up around about 17 Chinese yuan, which is a very positive move. Didn't get it up into around about that 3-figure handle, but it's certainly on the way. So that's where I'm looking at it. The US figures last night were relatively okay. I mean, we did see that the market's manufacturing PMI was better than expected at 56, but it's not a huge driver. It's not universally red. So again, it's all about the commodity space. It's all about what's happening there. And I think the bounce that we saw yesterday will probably follow through. As of right now, we are dead even for the week. So that's the interesting thing. We are sitting at 54.79 point, give or take a little bit, and that's where we are at the moment. I think today we'll probably finish the week on the upside, which is a good thing to see considering how strong we were sold off at the start of the week. It will also come down to what happens next week. Private capital expenditure number is out on Thursday for Australia. It is a very, very interesting sort of take about where currently companies are planning their capex for Q2, and that will be one part of the economy to also watch, and that may drive our sort of markets next week, particularly those materials plays that are looking at their capex expenditure and the fact that there is a little bit of a rockiness coming out of China.
Okay, talking about exports. It was interesting to note some of the moves on overseas markets last night. When you take that China data into consideration, because I guess, when we see the performance of some of these European markets, does it sort of speak to the fact that the exporting read that we saw yesterday shows that there is recovery in some of its key markets?
Certainly do, and I think the other way you look at it at the moment, Nadine, is you've got to have a look at what's going on in the DAX, and the DAX is the clear one over in Europe at the moment that is making a win, and if it was to open on their futures right now, they would make a record high, so be watching that quite closely. And the reason I concentrate on the DAX is that Germany and the German economy is a very much an export-led economy that has started to really, over the last 4 or 5 years, concentrate on Asia. So their big exporters, their pharmaceuticals, their automobile industry are all moving into the Asian region, and they are obviously now also getting a kick by the fact that the central government in China is looking at domestic demand, and we have an ECB that is currently, is expected to do some form of easing, which will drop the euro. So there's a double pop there for what you're seeing out of those export nations, and that's why last night that reasonable good figure on the services PMI out of Germany really drove that market, and why if you look at a Daimler, if you look at a Volkswagen, you look at a BMW, I look at a Bayer, they're all doing incredibly well because of that Asian strategy. And as you said, China's exports also therefore go and support those markets with bulk commodities, bulk steel, etc., that ends up in Germany and then goes back to China as a finished product. So that's what's the interesting development I see, and I think it's going to be a theme that comes out over the next couple of months to a year or so, that Germany particularly, France is still a little bit iffy, but it too is an export nation, and why you saw those two indices, the CAC and the DAX, outperforming the rest of the region despite it was a fairly soft night for data, and that will be the interesting development. I think that's one area of the world that will be very interestingly watched over the next year or so, because I think that's the macro theme to watch indeed.
Yeah, I was actually thrown a little bit this morning by seeing that rise in the CAC when you took into consideration the data that's been coming from France as of late. Just tell us, what else are you looking for today? We've got the Spotless IPO coming up. I mean, really, what's capturing your interest? Because we haven't seen sort of a lot coming out in the local market this week.
No, and unfortunately that's probably going to be it. Spotless will be probably the most interesting thing on that IPO front. There are a lot of Australian IPOs at the moment. Spotless will be the biggest one this year. It was going to be possibly up there with the same sort of size as Vita, but the fact that the book build is at the bottom end at around about $1.60 rather than $1.80 has dropped it away. It's going to be also interesting again about this play between private equity spinning, obviously taking something in and then spinning it out 24 to 36 months later for the same price they paid for it, but with the 50% the size it was. So again, you've got to ask the question, has the business turned around that much? Has private equity really got it back into a lean, mean machine that they are talking about? Interesting to see the share price today, and Spotless will be one to watch. Again, the energy plays are also still out there. The drive from Woodside, the drive from Oil Search and Santos is certainly a play to be aware of, and I think that will continue to move. Peter Coleman yesterday certainly sort of suggested that that's the case. Other one to watch today will be Telstra, and Telstra has finally come out and admitted something that I think was coming, in the fact that they now want 1/3 of their earnings to come from Asia, according to a report coming out of Fairfax with an interview with David Thodey. And I think that is probably the way he needs to go. He's just sold out of Hong Kong and he's got a lot of cash on balance sheet that he may look at doing some big acquisition. So watching the reaction to that as well, they're the ones I'll be watching in the Australian market. Okay. All in all, be a fairly flat day, unfortunately, because there's not a huge amount of news.
No. Evan, nevertheless, we'll check in with you later when trading gets underway to see what unveils, what happens, because you never quite know, do you? Thanks for now.
That's right. Thanks, Adine.
Evan Lucas from IG.